All right, thanks so much, Barbara Starr. So, have the coalition's efforts along the border been effective? Let me bring in CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's a former commanding general in the U.S. Army, and he joins me now from Orlando. Good to see you.
Good morning, Frederica. How are you?
I'm great. So you just saw in that piece from Barbara Starr that one ISIS fighter who essentially is saying, you're really not hurting us. What you're doing is damaging the infrastructure here, the schools and the residences. So at what point are you able to tell whether these airstrikes are helping the Kurds hold on to and protect Kobani?
Well, that final piece was a page out of the terrorist playbook. Whenever they are struck and struck hard, they immediately go into the, hey, you're not hurting us, you're killing civilians, you're bombing schools and hospitals and things like that. It's typical. And unfortunately, we have some pretty good proof that we have, in fact, had some significant effects on ISIS fighters, both in Syria and Iraq. As you heard Barbara say at the end there, you know, they are changing their ways of operation. They're not communicating on cell phones. They are not moving as much. All of those things are the first page of what we in the military call the beginning of culminations of the offense. You will start seeing continued slowdowns. You will start seeing them continue to group in smaller packages. And all of that is a precursor to being able to strike them harder as both the Iraqi army improves and the Syria Free Army improves.
But it also sounds like you're painting the picture that it is more difficult to spot them if they're breaking up into smaller groups, harder to identify them.
Frederica, extremely difficult. They are now intermingling more with the population. Now remember, you know, the town we're talking about, Kobani, is a relatively small border post. It's an important border post to them. It's operationally significant, just like the city of Rabia in Iraq is, just like the Harbor Gate, because these are the areas where they bring foreign fighters in, jihadists in, and it's also not often talked about the places that they export their fraudulent oil and their corrupt oil to get more money. So those border posts in and out of Syria, in and out of Iraq are critically important for bringing jihadists in and exporting and getting more funding. So what you're talking about is a small town, a town of about 40,000, about as big as Fairfax City in Washington, D.C., and you're talking about a continued fight with Syrian Kurds, which there's a whole nother complex problem given the Turks now want to come in, and as Rick Francona said in the piece, about 650,000 professional soldiers in that Turkish army with a lot of tanks and a lot of artillery. It's critical if they start playing in this fight.
So do you see the Turks potentially playing in a ground forces kind of way, or just as you mentioned, you know, they have tanks, etc., would they also be involved by air?
Yeah, well, the Turks have always been contentious in this area because they have a whole bunch of national priorities that don't quite fit in with what our national priorities are, and they have a problem with the Kurds, both in Iraq and in Syria. The Kurds want a space, and the Turks see that as an incursion into Turkish space. So I think you know, the Turks are going to have to eventually choose between an extremely violent terrorist organization to their south and the potential of working a little bit closer with the Kurds to provide security. So they're really caught on the horns of the dilemma. Their parliament voted last week in terms of them sending forces, but they haven't identified yet what this is. And again, you're talking about General Allen moving through the area, retired General Allen, who knows this area very well and who understands how to get the uprising of the Sunni population and the Kurdish population of Iraq. All that is going to contribute to that culmination of the ISIS force eventually.
All right, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thanks so much for your expertise this morning.
Thank you.
All right, many of you have been tweeting your Ebola questions to #Ebola Q&A. Well, next we have an infectious disease specialist from the Emory School of Medicine here to answer your questions. Up next.